Okay. So Hannah, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? I think we chatted on in the comments a bit.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're doing and what you would like to be doing instead.
So I just got made redundant from my full-time graphic design job, um, working for this marketing agency. And that was so I was there since like June last year. Um, and that was just doing like random bits from like email designs to like social media designs, for like different brands of spirits, like targeted ads and stuff, and also like TV shows, for like NBTV and like they had different clients like Gulf Nation, Spirits Network, and all of those. So I got made redundant because he said he couldn't afford to keep me on anymore, so it was just him. But then I've just been doing like random freelance stuff with him because he's found it a bit hectic as he's the only one working for that company now. And but since then I've been getting like freelance jobs in from like clothing companies and like random bits and bobs like that. So but what I want to be doing really is working full time with a graphic design or like advertising agency. Um because it's just like more secure basically than freelance. But I'm like kind of struggling. I'm getting the interviews, but I just find they always want something a bit with someone with a bit more experience and stuff like that. Um, so yeah.
How so you were working with this kind of like marketing agency. Are you like fresh out of uni? Are you like was that kind of like your first role?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2021, and I did freelance stuff alongside my degree and stuff like that. And then my first role was with this marketing agency. Um, but I gained a lot of experience with that, like a crazy amount, because it was just me and the founder. And like he was on holiday a lot of the time, so I was in charge of the agency as well. And so I was literally doing anything from like proposals with clients and doing their pitch decks and stuff too, like the actual output as well, and the copywriting and everything. So it's like really intense.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know you sent me over like your portfolio presentation. We can look at that. But why don't you tell me a little bit more about like what like kind of like what you were getting at, where like you were doing a lot of things because the founder was like out, on holiday or whatever it was. Like, tell me a little bit more about what you've done and like what was your relationship with like how did you work with clients? Like how did, like what was that process like?
Yeah, so the thing is with that role is that it wouldn't be what I consider like a normal design process because I like to research a lot about design processes and strategies and stuff like that, when it comes to like rebranding. And that's like something I've focused on more recently with my freelance work, for companies. But with that, it was very, very, very fast paced. So it would be more so like, can you just design like a post for this brand? And then I'd be like, okay, but then I'd like look on like Pinterest and research different adverts and stuff like along that line, but I wouldn't be able to get too in depth because it would be like a two hour turnover or like 3 hours at most. So that's what it was very much like. Um, but with the clients, like we'd always share like a Slack channel and stuff, so it'd be constant and we'd be getting approval for different things like quite often.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's really important to mention these bits, right? But I obviously like I think you need to think about how you want to phrase it, right? So one, like working in a fast-paced environment, right? You had anywhere from an hour to 2 hour turnarounds for some of these things because that's how the agency worked. And not only that, but you were also communicating with the client in that short amount of time to make sure that whatever you were working on was in alignment to their brand and their objective. So I think it's like really key to kind of pull these points out and make sure like you sort of explain them, talk about them. But again, you want to make sure like you're kind of framing it in a way that's positive, like
Yeah.
yes, we've graphic designers constantly work on tight deadlines,
Yeah.
like we'll get stuff that like needs to be done like right now.
Mm.
And while no one says that, like you don't hear people unless, you know, like when you're like kind of chatting with your friends and stuff, like, you know, you'll hear that, but you never hear someone like at an agency speak like that. It's always like, well, you know, we make sure we work really closely with the clients and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So in an interview setting, you want to make sure that you're kind of like making sure to note that, you know, yeah, I work directly with the client. You know, sometimes we had anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Other times we were working on longer deadlines, things like that. Um, what was so was it more so like you were just, you know, you would talk directly to the client, and you mentioned like you would do pitches, you would do social posts. Um, what other stuff did you kind of work on for some of these projects?
So it'd be like email designs, marketing, web page design, um, yeah, social media design, um, a lot of just like simple imagery work for like backgrounds of like presentations and stuff like that. Um, um, Social media design for like highlights and stuff like that. Um, and like logos. Yeah.
Okay, so I would try to think about like how do you prioritize these things in an order, right? Like it sounds like you worked on a lot, and I'm sure you kind of worked with a bunch of different clients in the time, right? So how do you show that you've worked on everything from like a bit of branding to logo design to website design to marketing? When I think
Mm,
what happens sometimes is like we love to break it out and say like, yeah, I did social media design and I did, you know, email design, but we can kind of think of it as like, what is the bigger picture here? Like ongoing marketing for a company, right? Like social media. I think a lot of designers are leading with social media right now because it is a skill that you can get paid for.
mm,
And a lot of brands do need that. So like some may look for, you know, specifically a social media designer, but if you're going for an agency or you're going for like a bigger organization, they're
yeah.
going to be looking for like those bigger chunks that are more like branding, marketing, strategy, you know, web design, things like that. Because I think sometimes email and social media sort of get kind of bucketed within the marketing part. And when you lead with like something like social media design, or you lead with something with email design, it kind of clicks as like, oh, that's someone who specifically only does that thing. And they don't really have any outside vision of the other bigger pieces that we may do at this agency or this company.
Okay.
So just try to, you know, I think like we'll go through your portfolio, but also think about like when you're presenting these, I would kind of try to bucket them into a few pieces, you know,
Okay.
like you said, branding, logo design, marketing, some website design here and there, and keep it at that because it tends to be a little bit higher level thinking than say like we need a social media post now. We need to just like have this to drive sales, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, let's go through your portfolio. And now when you said you're getting interviews, are you sending this document to them and they're reviewing it?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's look at this.
I keep meaning at making a website, but I just don't have time at the moment with all the
Yeah,
work.
I mean, I think I recommend that it's okay to have one or the other right now, especially you're younger in your career and you know you're just starting off. Like, do
Yeah.
one thing, keep it focused, and keep it, you know, as good as possible, and you'll be okay when you have time to do a website. Sure, get, you know, you
Yeah.
can do that too, but let's focus on one thing at a time. You know, we don't want you to go crazy outside of your, you know, your full time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the first thing I think is key that I'm missing here, and I, I like to think it's important, but you want to have a slide that kind of explains your experience. And, you know, I know that might be a little bit difficult as you were at a university, you had one role, but what are those things that you just told me that you can kind of list as like points that are valuable from this role, right? So you, you know, communicated with the client directly to figure out objectives for campaigns. And you don't have to write this stuff down. I'll have all this. This is being recorded
Oh,
and
okay.
I'll send all the notes and stuff like that. So you can watch
Okay.
through it. Um, you can talk about working in a fast-paced environment. You can talk about being, you know, on a very small team. You know, these are all things that start to register for places like agencies that like make sense and what they end up looking for.
Yeah.
And I think also, kind of just using that opportunity to give a little personality to who you are, rather than just like another face who sent or another designer that sent their portfolio in.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
The other thing that I'm thinking is there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff in here already on this contents page. And just as a general note, because I clicked through this before, I think you need to really nail down some sort of template, like some sort of
Okay.
layout that stays consistent.
Mhm.
You just have a lot of pieces moving around, a lot of different typefaces, and like it changes from kind of like project to project. All right. Like there's just a lot of movement going on. So it's almost distracting, which I think, because I mean, part of this is going to be judged on the design of the actual presentation.
Mhm.
So let's go through here. So this is your experience. This is, so H&H is you.
Mhm.
What are these two? What are these two?
Yeah, so these are, so Me on Media was the last agency that I worked with since June last year, and then Fizzy Mag and Do Skateboarding I did as internships. They're based in Berlin, and I just did it after university whilst doing other things to gain experience, basically. But
Awesome.
that was
So you can absolutely include those on that slide that we just talked about of like, here's my experience. There's nothing wrong with showing internship. Again, you're out of school. You're a year and a half out of school. Like it's good that you had an internship. That already puts you kind of ahead of the pack, where a lot of designers or creatives come out and they didn't have any internship, didn't have any experience. And I think having that all collectively on one page will help out.
okay.
And it also more so like the second page rather than like, the third, because already I'm like looking like I would combine this slide and this slide
Mhm.
before I get into contents. And I don't even know if you need a contents page really.
Mhm. Yeah.
These graphs, I don't think I think they're arbitrary. It's like, where do I want to put these things that I feel like make sense? And I don't think you don't need to categorize like what it is that like you're trying to say like, yeah, I'm good at logo design, I'm good at typefaces, I'm good at submarks, and just let the work speak for itself. Don't overcomplicate it.
Okay, I put it in to sort of like just show my strategy a bit more, because a lot of the jobs that I've gone for tend to like you to explain branding strategy and what it takes to get to that point. So like that's how I've designed it into an iceberg sort of thing. So it's like the underneath thing, that's what goes into creating the top of the iceberg.
I would say, okay, I like, you would know that better than I would, like what these agencies are expecting, especially if you're interviewing. What I would say is I would almost rather see like not like, I don't want to say step-by-step process, but like, because these things are all over the place, and I know you're showing like, here's the line of like, I'm gonna draw. Can I draw on here now? Yeah, I can. You're saying like, here's the line, and then everything below is like behind the scenes, and then everything above is what you see as a consumer.
Yeah.
I think it's almost it's like kind of overcomplicated,
Okay.
and maybe it's just because stylistically you're like really trying to get the point across that this is an iceberg.
Mhm.
And I'm imagining that you have points to speak about it, like my thought is branding is sort of like a big iceberg that's moving at a very slow pace, and below the surface you're seeing all this stuff. But I think you could almost really get simpler in this design to make it a little bit more clear. And I think also potentially rethinking some of these labels, right? Like I look at a lot of these strategies, PR, target audience, multiple ideas, I don't know. voice, identity, culture, branding rules. That's what you're talking about. And then market position. Sure. I think, yeah, that could work. But then you have like kind of broader terms up here, like elements. All of these are elements, right? Logo, submarks, brand stories. I would push to see if you can get a little bit more detailed with some of these
Mm-hmm.
in a way, like typefaces make sense, color palettes make sense. Does brand stories come back down here or something? Just something to think about with some of these. Look at
Okay.
all drawings. Let's go back. Here I've created a visualization of my brand. And also, I mean, okay, again, I know you're sending this as a link to application, so something like this might be helpful, but again, as a more general note, I think you need to lay down a template where like points like this are appearing the same place. So you're kind of setting the expectation for people to know where to look.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then for once we get into the work, what I like to recommend is like, I need like here is a slide of a brand that I'm going to talk about. And I'm setting that expectation, like this is where the work starts.
Okay.
And then once you're able to nail down where like text goes, you're not going to have this sort of weird sort of like rag going on, because I would imagine this is a little bit difficult to read. You're already at like a very fine, very small type size. Ramazzotti. And then, like I go from one project. This is really hard for me to read, which is like, forcing me to just click through it
Mm-hmm.
to another project. So I'm not really getting much from, and I'm sure it's in here, but it's hard to get to that point of wanting to read because the type is so small that I want to just click through really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, like we need to have a moment of pause. We need to introduce what you're going to talk about and then go into it. Tell me what all of this stuff is. Walk me through this.
Okay. I'll get up my notes because like when I talk through it, I like to speak about it in a certain. Okay, so for this one, Scotch Concierge, so they are a fine liquid and spirit section of the Spirits Network website. Like so I think they're like sponsored outside from this other company. And they wanted a logo that will present their brand of having the finest liquids. These bottles are like thousands of pounds, up to like the tens of thousands. So how did I get there? I researched different logos of fine liquid brands and spirits, the bottles themselves, and also similar subscription services as well. And then I like to present it in like a Pinterest board. I like to look on different websites as well, take screenshots and stuff like that. And
For the
then
client.
yeah.
For the client, okay.
Yeah, but it was quite open with the way they wanted it. We just got basically a document that basically presented what the subscription service is, and how they wanted it to have a general feel to it. So yeah, and then I looked on the actual website as well, their actual website, and what I was thinking, how could I improve that actual presentation, that actual branding now? How could we take it a step further? And yeah, I began to make sketches. I began to make like color palettes and all of that. And this is what I've come up with basically.
Okay. So everything that you just said, right, needs to be almost its own slide, right? Like the beginning, you had me at like, so this is Scotch Concierge. It's a very high luxury sort of service where they deliver these 1,000-pound bottles. And that is your introduction slide, right? That is the slide where you just kind of hold for a second and then you start talking. Your next slide is potentially like what the before looked like,
Okay.
and this is what they were looking like before. They gave us the brief of what the service was and where they wanted to be. And from there, your next slide is going to be like, so I decided to start putting together boards, vision boards for the brand to look at, and we could share ideas and talk about what they liked and disliked. All of these points that you just said, that you just talked about, needs to be in their own individual slides, right? Because all of that is super valuable, and that's where you show your experience. That's where you show how much you've learned since graduating and how much work that you put into this. Because otherwise, I just look at this and go, okay, so maybe she made this mark, maybe they put together a quick website and they made a business card, right? And then I'm on to the next one, and then I'm thinking, okay, are these just ads, whatever. This project itself, from what you've told me, can have 4, 5, 6 different slides where you walk through each individual step, right? You have your step of inspiration and process. You have your step of, logo development and how you work through a bunch of different ideas for that. Then you have your slide of, here's the logo and application. And then your next slide is, here's what we went into for other applications, such as the website, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So you have more, you have more time to talk through it. You don't have to rush through on one slide. And then, by the time you get through those 4, 5, 6 different slides, they may have questions for you, and that's an opportunity to show even more experience. They'll ask you, oh, well, why did they pick this? Or why did you pick that? And you could say exactly what, you were thinking. Oh, well, the brief was in this way, and from talking with the client and working with them directly, we were able to figure out that this is what they actually meant or what they actually wanted. Which one of these, I'm going to click through, which one should I stop at and like feels in the same way that Scotch Concierge, like you were able to go through and talk about it in a very nice way? Like, which one of these projects is similar to that?
I'd probably say either that one, to be fair, or the collection design, or the Ramazzotti one.
I like this one too. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so this was a paid ad for Spirits Network about the Ramazzotti brand. This was like in springtime last year, and they just basically wanted to promote the bottle and how you could use it in your sort of home bar experience. And we presented that by using like one of the videos on the Spirits Network. And I basically created 3D assets of the exact recipes that were featured in the video, with direct links to the bottle itself. And basically we wanted to present it as like Italy in one bottle, because they focus on a lot of things to do with like Italy and the Italian story behind the bottle. Because I looked at the social media pages for Ramazzotti and they focus on that a lot, and we used a lot of the social media stuff for the stuff that they already have for what we did here. So like color schemes and stuff like that, and the copywriting, I basically went alongside the style for that. And yeah.
So this is good because you have, Scotch Concierge is like kind of starting from scratch. And then Ramazzotti is like, we have a brand, we need you to create assets off of that brand, that align really clearly. So it doesn't look any different. It kind of feels at home. And this is another great like project to show and really, really expand upon about everything you just told me. So, you could talk about how Ramazzotti is sort of a brand that's already has a very clear distilled down brand identity. But they had this problem where they wanted to do this ad, or, again, whatever the brief was. And, everything that you just told me about, like the 3D assets, like I don't get any of that from this. So I need a slide sort of illustrating that you develop these, and I would almost keep them separate from the ad until, you get to that one slide that's here's everything together, and this is what it came to in the final outcome. Can you tell me a little bit about like what Spirits Network is?
Yeah, so it's an American website, and they have like sort of TV channels and their own TV shows. and they also sell the spirits themselves, and it's basically a platform where everything spirits is combined. And so yeah, we were just producing stuff for them, and they have different links with all the spirits as well.
And what is like where does that connection to the place that you were working at come in? Like, are these brands coming to you and saying that this is where the ad's going, or is it Spirits Network? You're working directly with Spirits Network for these projects?
Yeah, it's directly with Spirits Network for these projects.
Okay, I think it's important to mention because you could do this two separate ways, right? You could do everything that we just talked about where you break out, this presentation, expand
Yeah.
on a project basis, or you could also introduce it as the client is Spirits Network.
Yeah, that's what I always get confused about, because people always say it's better to like have Spirits Network all together, but I've just done so much. Most of my work is Spirits Network. Um,
And that's fine. Again, like I'm guessing, is this Spirits Network as well?
yeah,
Spirits Network or no? This is something different.
yeah, different.
Different.
Mostly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bigger missing piece, right? I think like I again, I don't know I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong, right? Because you could present this as, Scotch Concierge is the project in collaboration with Spirits
Mhm.
Network, and you can
Yeah.
really expand this out to 5, 6 different slides. And then, you don't have to talk about any other projects or from Spirits Network. You can then move on to something like Mercedes-Benz. Or you can move on to any of these other ones. So this is another Spirits Network, right? Like this is
Yeah.
the header. Um,
So those logos are for NBTV, and
mm,
they're they own Spirits Network, but they also own other um like similar sites, so like Golf Nation, which is like golf
mm.
related, and yeah.
So I think you just need to be a little bit more intentional. So like the clients are Pursuit, NBTV, and Spirits Network.
Yeah, and then there's
Um,
Polly, the clothing one, and there's yeah.
okay. So I think it's really important. I think I can't make this decision for you. It's more, I would look at it this way. What are you going to be able to talk to and present more easily, right? Is it the fact that you work for Spirits Network and you did so many different projects? Or is it the fact that you spent a lot of time on one specific Spirits Network project or one specific project from MBTV or, whatever? The other thing I want to make sure to mention is like you're presenting too much stuff. It's not so much about the quantity, it's about the quality. I'm sure you've heard that a million times. And what I mean by that, like what in relation to like design and your portfolio, it's like it's not so much that you had a large volume of work or that you want to show that you've done that. You want to show the thought process because in that discussion, in that presentation is where you show experience.
Yeah.
So again, going back to that first Scotch project, everything that you told me in that first bit
Mm-hmm.
is the experience, right? That's how you show agencies your experience and that you are able to do that. Um, Also those other things of like making sure that they see that you had time here, internship there, like that sets the stage to know like, yeah, I'm younger, but like I've put my work in at these places.
Yeah.
Um, and if you wanted to show other things, like I think you need to, so my what I had done and what I would still do today is I would show 3 projects that I could talk about in a nice, fluid, lengthy, discussion.
Yeah.
Um, and if I had anything else that I wanted to show, I would be very selective. I would not go with showing them in places like in ways like this where everything's just all on the page and you kind of, you know, you don't know what to look at or what to talk about necessarily. Um, for example, like if Golf Nation was so Golf Nation isn't a logo that you necessarily did, but it is like say a landing page that you did for NBTV.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with like this or Spirit Network, whatever. yeah, there's no consistent story, like,
I
or
get.
line that's telling me, like, this is what I do, and this is my process, and this is how we got from one point A to point B. Everything is just like, here's point A, or not so much point A, that here's point B,
Yeah.
here's the end point, here's the finish line, here's the finish line. And I think like that is usually taken as an experience, which I'm not saying you are, but when people just click through this stuff, it's like, oh, they're just someone that like gets paid to make design that like works. And I know that's not the case, but that is what we all struggle with at times, is trying to show as much as possible.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense.
um and again, like I would look to simplify your layout and have some consistency, because
Hmm.
I would get to like these start to feel a little out of place when in relation to some of these other slides. I'm also not a fan of the numbers falling, moving around the page. I would just keep it really simple. I mean,
Hmm.
to give you an idea, like I will one day make a video of this if I can find my old portfolio, but my first slide was my name up here in like Helvetica,
Hmm.
uh portfolio, and then like page number. And then the next slide was um work experience, experience 1, experience 2, experience 3.
Okay.
And then my next slide was usually the first project. So let's click over to here. And again, we talked about, most people are looking, I guess in the UK, a lot of people are looking for you to speak to that. That's fine. Once you align the rest of your presentation, and hit a format, come back, have another go at this. But then my next slide usually is just the logo or the name of the project, and potentially a couple of lines of what I did. I was always a fan of just keeping like as little text on the presentation as possible, because I could speak to everything, because I would interview so much that I've memorized a lot of the stuff that I would go through. At some
Mm.
point, I did it so much that I forgot, and I would almost make up new stuff as I went, which
Okay.
like, yeah, obviously didn't work out for me, but like it's just nice to be able to speak to that stuff rather than getting everything on the page and then repeating it. But I know you're sending this out to the application, so balance that a bit.
How many projects would you say like it's worth having? Because I obviously I have like so many different ones.
I look at it this way. This same presentation that I would send in is the same one that I would show up to the interview with and talk about. And the way I looked at it was, I usually have enough time to speak to 2 of those 3 projects. And
Mm.
then by the end of the interview, if we had a little bit of time, I could touch on the 3rd project or whatever it may be. Um, and these would, I use those 3 projects in a way where I would kind of shift them around depending on where I was going to interview at. Like I would, if I was
Yeah.
going to this agency and I knew that this project would be better, I'd move that around. And you have
Yeah.
enough projects here where you could kind of figure out like, okay, where do I need to place these to make sense? But again, like I think it's better to show a limited amount and really expand upon those than it is to show a ton. So I like to recommend 3. And, if there's a place where you want to have a slide at the end that's, maybe like a extra bit to show all of the other ones that you worked on, maybe it's just like all the logos in black or white. When there's too many colors here, it's a bit distracting, it's a bit messy, right? Because none of them start to go together. So that could be a nice way to sum up like all the other projects that you worked on.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you'd want to talk about or go over before we potentially sign off?
No, I think that sounds like it makes sense, yeah. How many interviews did you like get through when you were like trying to get
I
your
would
first?
I would interview. So I had my first, after university, I had gotten my first job pretty quickly. I had worked with a recruiter and I worked at that job for like 6 months. It was a contract. My first experience as like a freelancer and learning about that, because I really didn't have a clue in school about like that whole other side of not having a full-time job.
Yeah.
Um, and then um, what did I do after? I I had gotten a project. I was still living at home with my parents. I didn't have any bills or anything. So I got like one project that lasted like 3 months. It was only like $1,000 or something. It was super, super low for the amount of work that was done. And then I got a project. No. I'm trying to think through my experience. Hold on. And then I got hired as another full-time job. And it took me a bit to get there, I think. But it wasn't until like after my first 3 roles, like full-time jobs, that I started to realize like I can take interviews all the time.
Yeah.
And I would take like 3 or 4 calls during the week. I don't know why at the time it just happened. The industry kind of goes through these spikes where certain roles are really popular. And like for a while, when I was younger, it was like product designers, UI, UX designers were really in demand. And so I would get a call from a recruiter, at least 1 or 2 a week. And I would set up the calls and, chat with them and see what they were doing. And through that, I just ended up practicing a lot of like what I wanted to say to these projects and how I wanted to talk about my experience. And so I did that a lot. I did it a lot at my third to last and second to last job before I got to my very last job. So, I would say like that wasn't a testament to me being this amazing designer. It was more so like sort of just taking advantage of the fact that people were just like clueless and calling any designer they could to see if they
Yeah.
were available, and just using it as an opportunity to practice and figure out like, how do I present myself to these
Mm.
opportunities for the day that I do actually want to go on to a new role or something like that. Cause I wasn't looking for a job, but hey, if they were going to give me more money, why not?
Yeah.
So the exact number I couldn't tell you, but I know I did do it a lot. And I think that was very funny to use it as a learning experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel like, especially like after having so many calls, like I feel like I'm getting so much better. Um, and yeah.
Exactly. It's not easy to talk about the things that you're thinking while you're working on this stuff. You come up with an idea and you're like, oh, this looks really good. This is great. I'm going to go and do it. And then you start tweaking and you think about more, but we forget to, kind of articulate those decisions. We forget to talk about those decisions and tell people why you did it. So, it's never something you end up practicing unless you are actually interviewing. And,
Yeah.
by then it's a little late,
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
No, absolutely. Yeah. If you have any questions, if you make some updates or anything like that, you want to send them, you have my email, and you probably in about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll get another email from me. It's going to have a link to like 2 or 3 questions. If the faster you can fill those out and send it back to me,
Mhm.
that'll just let me know where I should send the recording and all the notes.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All
Great
right,
help.
Hannah, you have a good one. All right.
You too. Cheers.
Bye bye.